The possibility that God could support war is not just blasphemy or heresy. It's just a false image, a false God. It's not true. That's the whole testimony of Jesus. And therefore, if we can reimagine who God is, maybe we can reimagine what it means to be human. To be human is to be nonviolent. To be church. Well, the church should be the community of nonviolent followers of the nonviolent Jesus. I don't see the problem there. I've said this in the Vatican in this speech. Like, what did I miss something? It's the church community of people who want to give their lives, like Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Romero and Dorothy Day.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture Podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. At 21 years old, John Deere stood at the Chapel of the Beatitudes on the Sea of Galilee. He read the words of Jesus on the wall, and he heard 3 Israeli fighter jets scream overhead and drop bombs on the Lebanese border. He walked out of that chapel a different person, convinced that the Beatitudes were a job description, and that blessed are the peacemakers was not a suggestion. That was 1982, and in the 44 years since, Father John Deere has been arrested dozens of times, traveled to war zones around the world, befriended Archbishop Tutu and the Berrigan brothers, and written nearly 40 books on the nonviolence of Jesus. His latest, Universal Love, Surrendering to the God of Peace, is the culmination of everything he's learned, that the path to genuine peacemaking isn't found in better strategy or more efforts, but in total surrender to the God of peace. This conversation is landing at a moment when the world feels saturated with violence, with nationalism, with fear. John isn't interested in despair, and he isn't interested in optimism either. He's interested in what Jesus actually said in the Sermon on the Mount as a living instruction manual, in nonviolence as the full force of love directed at the truth of our shared humanity, and in surrender as the only foundation stable enough to build a life of peace on. So join us for this conversation as we dive into surrendering to the God of peace, following the nonviolent Jesus. What would it look like if we stop trying to run it ourselves, but we would say, not my will, but your will be done, God, and we surrender to the God of peace? Well, join us. Here is my conversation with Father John Deere. John, welcome to Shifting Culture. It's an honor to have you on, so thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Joshua.
We're going to get into your book, Universal Love, Surrendering to the God of Peace, which is really, I think, really crucial and important for ourselves, our relationship with God, for the world that we live in. And this is a culmination of a lot of your work. You've come to some of these realizations really about surrender, but you've been involved with nonviolence for a long time and peace for a long time. Where did that first come in for you? Why were you so attracted to nonviolence and peace?
Well, thanks again for having me, Joshua. So I'm 66 years old at the moment, and this is, I think, about my 40th book. But all my books are about peace and nonviolence and Jesus and God, and in today's world of violence and poverty and war. It's hard to say. I've talked about this so much, but I went to Duke in the 70s, was a wild college kid, decided to give all that up and follow Jesus and become a Jesuit priest. My parents were pretty appalled at that and asked me to wait for a year. I got a job working for the Robert Kennedy family, of all things, in their little human rights center, made a little bit of money, and announced that before I entered the seminary, after waiting a year, I would go and hitchhike through Israel for 3 months to see where Jesus lived. What's not to like? They thought I was nuts, and maybe I was. And then the week I was to leave, Israel invaded Lebanon. And it's what we're going through right now. This is the summer of 1982. And it was all orchestrated at the Pentagon, called Operation Peace for Galilee. And they killed 60,000 people in 3 months. And I spent almost 3 months hitchhiking through Israel by myself. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, totally oblivious, just a backpack, got my Bible, just thinking, Jesus, I'm going to give my life to him. I want to see where he lived. My goal was to go to the Sea of Galilee, and I camped out there. And it was there while visiting the Chapel of the Beatitudes that I was reading the Beatitudes on the church walls and really shocked. I was going, wow. I said out loud, and it's a story I've often, I think he's serious. Blessed are the peacemakers. That was not my intention. And it kind of occurred to me that this is the job description of anyone who claims to follow Jesus. You hunger and thirst for justice. You're a peacemaker. You're merciful. You're willing to be persecuted because you insist on justice. And I walked out and I'm looking out over the whole sea and I'm talking to God and I'm going, like, you got to be kidding me, man. And all of a sudden there were these loud explosions and 3 huge black Israeli jets fell from the sky, setting off sonic booms, breaking the sound barrier. Boom, 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 and swooped down over the Chapel of Beatitudes and dropped a whole bunch of bombs 15 miles away on the border of Lebanon. And I decided then and there that I would spend the rest of my life trying to live the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount and to teach it and practice it. And here I am. That was, I don't know, 44 years ago. And now I'm running the Beatitudes Center for the Nonviolent Jesus. I entered the seminary a few weeks later. I was a completely different person because I was on fire. I thought, well, I better get to work. And I was a dopey 21-year-old kid as opposed to now. I'm still dopey. But I just looked at all the great saints and saw, well, they all gave talks and prayed and wrote books. I'm going to have to do all that. And they all got arrested. So I started getting arrested, and they all went to war zones, Gandhi, Dr. King, and they all talked about nonviolence as a new way to understand peace, that, going from the Hindu word ahimsa, you do no harm in thought, word, or deed. Think about that. Well, that's obvious what Jesus wants, but what Christian does that? Oh, we're all for peace and we're bombing the hell out of people all over the world and building bombs and we have guns. Total insanity. So just to end on that point, so I've really studied Gandhi, King, Dorothy Day, Merton. I became close friends with the Berrigans and to people like Archbishop Tutu and Mother Teresa and everybody, all the great saints, because I was really on fire to figure out what to do. And I came across a quote from Gandhi, which really set me on a path. This was in 1982. Gandhi said, now this is kind of paraphrasing, but Jesus is the greatest person of nonviolence on earth in the history. Isn't that great, Joshua? And then poor Gandhi goes on and says, and the only people on the planet who don't seem to know that Jesus is nonviolent are Christians. And I think I've spent the rest of my life trying to say that Jesus is nonviolent. If you want to be a Christian of any persuasion, you have to get rid of your guns, quit the military, not build bombs, practice total nonviolence like Gandhi and Dr. King and Dorothy Day, and get with the program of working for justice for the poor, a disarmed world, and protecting creation. And that's what I've tried to do with my life. And it's been an adventure.
It's been quite the adventure is going through it. And I think when we're looking at Gandhi and King and Dorothy Day, all of those, we go, hey, we have these examples of saints, and we can do this as well. We often start from a place of this nonviolent work or this activism, this peace pursuit is on my shoulders. I'm responsible to be able to do this fully without the full surrender to God and the God of peace. It feels like it's almost a backwards way of doing it. In your book, you're talking about the way that we could get to peace and activism in a way that reflects the will of God and the God of peace is through surrendering to him. How did you start to see that in the world, that surrender is key
Yeah.
to nonviolent action in the world.
Well, I have no intention of that. Let me tell you, this was a book I wrote maybe 10 or 15 years ago called The Nonviolent Life. And this was kind of after having given thousands and thousands of lectures on nonviolence and the nonviolence of Jesus. I was trying to figure out a simple formula to explain this to people. And so this is what I pitched before I wrote this new book. So I was saying that nonviolence requires 3 simultaneous attributes, okay, Joshua? Like, what we need is the holistic total nonviolence of Gandhi and King. Okay, you have to do 3 things at the same time, so hang in here with me. First, you gotta be totally nonviolent to yourself. Well, there you go, that's very powerful, and that means a lifetime of journey of prayer, letting God disarm your heart, and getting rid of all your anger, hurts, resentments, hatred, not being violent, quitting your jobs, whatever it is to cultivate a peaceful interior life, to practice interior nonviolence. At the same time, I propose you have to practice meticulous interpersonal nonviolence, nonviolence toward every human being on the planet and all the creatures and Mother Earth. How's that going for you, Joshua?
It's not going very well.
Well, maybe you're a
I'm trying.
Christian. That's the whole. Isn't that? I
Yeah.
mean, isn't that obvious now that you think that that's the point? So then you have to do lots of training in nonviolence and figure out why do I want to run over somebody after on my way home from church? Why do I hate that person in church? Or why does my relative always push my buttons? And what's the nonviolent response? And we get to practice this because if we're going to stand up and say no to nuclear weapons and war and racism, we're going to get triggered because people are going to push back. So we have to be working on nonviolence in a relationship. So, and the third thing I'm saying, at the same time you're doing your inner work, your interpersonal work, you have to be involved in the global bottom-up people power grassroots movement of nonviolence. Everybody's got to get involved. Notice I'm not talking about the church. I'm saying movements, because we now know that historically that's how positive change happens. The abolitionists, the suffragists, the civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the anti-Vietnam War movement. Apartheid only ended because of a bottom-up grassroots movement. So we all have to join movements, and you can pick I always say, you can't do everything, but you got to do something. Get involved with like the homeless or working to end racism or the environment, or I'm very much involved against war and nuclear weapons because they're all connected. Okay. So my friend, so you're asking how I got then to this book, which is my new book, Universal Love. So don't ask me how, friends of Archbishop Desmond Tutu for 20 years. I'm just spoiled rotten. And at some point, the peace movement, unfortunately, is pretty small. So you end up meeting, everybody, at global conferences and stuff. And I met him. And, at one point in the late 90s, I wrote to all the living Nobel Peace Prize winners and offered them an all expense paid trip to Iraq. And we were going to meet with Saddam. In fact, I did go with some. He almost came, but I almost now can't remember when we began to correspond. At some point in the early 2000s, after we knew each other, he asked me to be his pen pal. So we emailed every week until his death. Now, I knew Mother Teresa, but I never went and visited her. And I was determined I'm not going to do that with Tutu. He was sick with cancer for decades. So I go to see Tutu in South Africa 10 years ago, 2016. And I go all the way around the world with some friends, and he's catered a meal in my honor. And he had nominated me for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he's just great. And we're sitting over in the corner after we had mass, and we're talking. And he goes, "I'm so glad I'm not God." And I'm thinking he's crazy. Well, I thought he was crazy, and he thought I was crazy, and we were friends because we kidded each other. And he goes, "You don't know anything about nonviolence." Now, Joshua, that was fabulous to hear that from Tutu after I worked so hard. And I don't think he understands nonviolence. That's my arrogance. And he goes, no, this was life-changing. This is what happened. You have no idea just how nonviolent God is. And I'm going, huh? And he just starts this long story of talking about free will and its connection to nonviolence, which it's taken me 10 years to understand. He said, God is so totally nonviolent and infinitely loving that God cannot force God's self on us. God has to let us choose to do whatever we want, like a parent can let a child do this or that. And say, don't put your hand on the stove, you'll burn it, but the child, you don't force, you don't lock up the child. And that's love, means the freedom of nonviolence. So he said, every human being in history has rejected God's love, goodness, and nonviolence, and we're killing each other and we're on the verge of destroying the world. Think about how much God suffers and cries. And with that, he bursts into tears and falls into my arms. It was mythic. And he's going, oh, this went on. And again, very unusual that I'd gone so far, and he like dives right into it with me. Maybe he was waiting for someone to talk about with this, and he knew I was his student and friend. Anyway, because I don't know that he's ever written about this. So he's saying the problem is free will. We all choose our own will and not God's will. Okay. And we talked about that at length. Well, then I'm in California and the pandemic happens, and I'm writing my life's work, which is this big 500-page commentary on the Gospels, Joshua, from the perspective of Gandhi and Kingian nonviolence, as if I go through every sentence and say, see how Jesus is even more nonviolent than Gandhi and Dr. King. Never been a book like it. Meanwhile, if you're with me on all this, I'm slowing down like everybody. I was living in Big Sur by the ocean, almost in total solitude. And I had joined a gym, and this kid, 21-year-old kid, is the coach. And he comes up to me one day and said, I looked you up on the internet. I want you to be my guru. That was working for me, Joshua. So I said yes. Well, he was talking about a spiritual director. Now, mind you, all of this is floating around. I'm slowing down. I'm writing about Jesus, and I'm thinking about Tutu, who died around then, remember? So I meet with the kid, and I said, do you believe in God? And he says, no. I'm going, great. Well, what can I do to help you? He says, I want you to teach me meditation. I go, okay. Well, who are you meditating to? I say, you like peace? You like truth? You like love? And he goes, he's a 21-year-old kid. And, but I stayed with him. This is the first page of my book. And I said, well, okay, here's what you do. I want you to go off for the next week, and every single day, you want to meditate? Go sit in silence for 30 minutes and you be with universal love. And he goes, oh, I like that. I'll do that. And he comes back a week later. This is my gym instructor. And he bursts into tears and says, universal love showed up. And I was secretly going, yay, God. I mean, how could that not be? But then he says, and I know what I'm supposed to be. I go, oh, what's that? I'm supposed to be an extension of universal love. I never heard that before. That was working for me. So he also wanted me to teach him about writing. And so we started writing practice, and I'm doing spiritual direction for him. So I'm teaching him meditation, and then he wanted me to start teaching him nonviolence. And we're writing about this. And meanwhile, I'm working on the Gospels, but I'm doing my own work, and I begin to think about Tutu. And I'm noticing in the life of Jesus that he talks about God's will all the time. Anyone who does the will of God is my mother, my brother, my sister. And I'm going, huh? When you pray, say, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What? And I think the Sermon on the Mount, as Gandhi said, is the total teachings of nonviolence. Gandhi read it every day. But there's the word will. And Gandhi, I read all of Gandhi's writings and letters, and Gandhi wrote throughout his whole life to Christians saying, what is, you could almost hear him whispering, what is wrong with these Christians? Have they never read the Sermon on the Mount? It ends with Jesus saying, it's so touching. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, but not do what I say? And what he says is, blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies, seek first the kingdom, no more violence. And then it all leads up to the Garden of Gethsemane, not my will, your will be done. And it occurs to me that Tutu was telling me, if you want to practice total holistic nonviolence, like Gandhi and King, like Jesus, you can only do God's will from now on, not our will. And that set me off on a whole thing. And the word in the Christian spiritual mystical tradition is surrender or abandonment to divine providence. So I started writing and teaching the kid, well, look, you're going to be an extension of universal love. That means your life is over, kid. You're not going to do what you want. You are only doing what universal love wants you to do. And he's looking at me, he's going, okay. And I'm going, oh my God. He's running with it the way I was with the Berrigans when I was a kid trying to go far. And then I say in the last part of the book, there are political implications of doing God's will, which means you're not doing not only your will, but the will of the United States. Anyway, long story short, the kid completely changed his life and went to paramedic school, became number one in his class, and within weeks was saving people being shot and killed on the streets of Los Angeles. I kid you not. And he's doing that today as we speak. I am in awe. He's just completely changed his life. And I'm trying to too. And I wasn't intending to write this book, but I talked about it with people, and it begins to make more sense that the Gospels say that Jesus reached heights of total nonviolence and universal love because he didn't do his will at all. He only did what God wanted him to do. And that's how he could go to his death in total nonviolence, even forgiving people. And I never thought about that before, Joshua. And I think Tutu was trying to say, John, you still don't get it, that the spiritual depths of surrendering yourself to God are the path to total nonviolence. So we are right now, the world is worse than ever, and it's going to be getting much worse. And my book says, friend, and I'll end with this, Joshua, friends, if we're going to be mature followers of the totally nonviolent Jesus, it's time we all grow up and go all the way. And the prayer from now on is, not my will, your will be done. God of peace, God of universal love, God of nonviolence. I'm only going to do what you want. I'm done with my selfish will. And I'm finding that's pretty hard, Joshua.
It's really hard. And that's the question. I think my lifelong quote I give to people when they say, hey, what can I pray for you for? Or what should we pray for? I always say, listen to Jesus and do what he says. And that's my quote I give to people. And it's a good thing for me to think about. Okay, I'm going to listen to Jesus. I'm going to do what he says. Right there in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount and Lord's Prayer. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're praying for God's will to be done. It's kind of easy to say the words or to pray the prayer. It is really difficult to then actually surrender to it and say, okay, yes. What is the posture for us to help get us to that yes, rather than just saying the prayer or having a nice platitude?
Well, what I've been discovering since the pandemic is that, I'm a priest, Joshua. I've been at this since I was 21 with all the great saints teaching me. And I thought, hey, that's pretty impressive. Take a look, man. I'm doing God's will. And then I realized, Joshua, No. It's a lot of self-will, it's a lot of ego and pride, and any of these issues, anger or resentments, they're all signs that I'm trying to control God. Things are not going my way. And, Richard Rohr has a sentence in one of his books, "The spiritual life means losing all control." Most people think it's about really being in control and like we're really going to be good. It's in fact the opposite of that. Means you have to totally trust God. So first of all, it means recognizing that we're not doing God's will, and the world shows it. So we're on a new journey into total surrender to God. Well, that's got to mean the prayer beginning in the morning and throughout our day going, okay, what do you want me to do today? And we need the Gospels to help us with that and our community. And, as Stringfellow would say, and the newspaper, we're destroying the planet, racism, 5 billion people in subhuman poverty. We're moving into fascism and white supremacy and authoritarianism. No, we are getting closer to nuclear war than ever and catastrophic climate change. It's not just permanent warfare. The Sermon on the Mount, if Gandhi's right, is the how-to manual, how to be a disciple. And it's all about standing with the poor, being merciful, hungering, thirsting for justice, and being a peacemaker. And you're going to get in trouble for that. So keep going. No anger, no violence. The key sentence to me in the fifth antithesis, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, and this is the best translation in the Greek, offer no violent resistance to one who does evil. We're forbidden to do violence. That's what Gandhi took seriously that very few Christians do. And that leads to love your enemies, universal love, seek first the kingdom. Well, I think that the politics of that means we're no longer Americans. Forget being part of the United States. We don't have time for that now. Life is too short. We are full-time citizens of the kingdom of God, which is a kingdom of nonviolence and universal love. So we try to get rid of all violence in our lives, get rid of your guns, quit the military, don't have anything to do with war, don't send your kids to war, don't study war, and then try to do these things about how can you be more peaceful to yourself and everybody around you. And then what are you doing globally to help end all the wars and killing and greed that's killing billions of sisters and brothers? And the way to do that is through bottom-up people power movements, as Dr. King and Gandhi showed us. There's more happening now than ever before, oddly enough. There's a lot of, but everybody's got to be involved now. That's why I say everybody. So it's a little bit of all of that. And so you need a community to help you discern, and you constantly praying. And it's just an inner journey of total surrender and then a public journey. And that's what, led me to get arrested so much. I've been in and out of court and jail my entire life. But now I'm going through a deeper, so I kind of got that part, the activism. But as I'm getting older, the great teachers, I'm realizing I didn't understand them, but I hope I'm getting it now. It's a total inner surrender as well, that there's no more ego. There's no more self-will. There's no more pride or self-righteousness. And that can lead to not just, I would dare say, humility. It's not my strong point, but a deeper peace, because I don't have to worry or be anxious. Everything's in God's hands now. God's in charge of my life and the movement, and I'm going all into surrender. And I can go back to jail or prison. I can be killed. Whatever God wants is okay with me. And that's the path of nonviolence. If you're violent, if you have weapons, if you have money, you don't need God. If you're going to be totally nonviolent like Jesus, if you're going to have no weapons, no money, love everybody, wow, you're gonna need God, because it's rough out there, Joshua, and God will take care of you. But this is the question of faith and trust, things like that. Does that make sense?
It does. My question there is like, why is nonviolence so dangerous? The world is arrested with violence, but why is nonviolence, the counteracting of violence, so dangerous? Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening and thank you for supporting the show. If you'd like to support the show and get early ad-free episodes, you go to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com. And with your subscription, you could have a private podcast feed in your podcast app where you get to download early episodes before anybody gets to listen to them. You could also support the show by going to the support the show link at the bottom of the show notes in the app that you're using right now. That goes to a page that supports the work my wife and I do around the world. That donation is also tax deductible. So if you want a tax deductible donation, you could go there. Or if you want to support the show by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps new listeners find the show as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you so much for supporting this work so that we could see the body of Christ look more like Jesus.
Well, it's an interesting question. You notice I chose when I was 21 to use this clumsy word nonviolence solely because Gandhi and Dr. King did. They're saying that the language has been co-opted by the culture of war and empire. Certainly the church has. Jesus has been tamed. We think Jesus is violent. God is violent. We can wage war in God's name, enslave people, drop nuclear bombs for God. God bless America. Total blasphemy and heresy. Love. Everybody's for love. What does it mean anymore? I love my car. I love that TV show. Or, gosh, my whole life, everybody's for peace. Hitler was all for 1,000 years of peace. I had a campaign at Los Alamos for decades in New Mexico, where we built all of our nuclear weapons. And those people told me they're the greatest people of peace on the planet. And they built every single nuclear weapon, and we're going to destroy in 15 minutes all that God took for 15 billion years to build, to create. It's an insanity. Nobody uses the word nonviolence except for Gandhi and Dr. King. And it's a bad word, but it means no violence. But actually, I like to say active, creative nonviolence is the full force of love in the pursuit of the truth of our oneness with every human being on the planet and all of creation. And therefore, if we're all one and we're going deeper into that truth, we give our lives to love everyone. We resist all forms of violence and injustice. There's nothing passive about it. We're always allowing God to disarm us of our violence because we're all brainwashed. We're all addicted to violence. We're so sick now, but we have learned the boundaries of nonviolence. There is no cause, however noble, for which we will ever again support the taking of the single human life. We don't kill people. We don't kill people who kill people to show that you shouldn't kill people. We give our lives to stop the killing. Now, I once did a plowshares action with Philip Bergen. We walked onto a big Air Force base in North Carolina, right through the middle of national war games, 10,000 soldiers, right up to a big F-15 nuclear fighter bomber. We took out little hammers, like the prophet Isaiah said, and started hammering on the nuclear fighter bomber. And I faced 20 years in prison, and I did it almost a year. And it was really intense and really hard, and the greatest experience of God in my life. And it occurred to me in all the courts and being dragged around and so forth. And, I'm considered as high up a terrorist in the United States as you can get because I was messing around with nuclear weapons. But I think Jesus would want that. I wasn't hurting anybody or killing anybody. We're trying to just start the process of discernment. That, everybody laughed at me and thought it was ridiculous. My family, my friends, the Jesuits, the church, nobody took me seriously except for the government. The government. I think the government understands nonviolence much more than we do, beginning with the Christians, any peace people, because they know if you have priests and nuns and grandparents and students just walking on to military bases and saying, okay, that's it. We're not taking this anymore. Sure, go ahead and kill me, throw me into jail, but we're beginning the process of dismantling them. They've got a problem. This is how the movement works. The abolitionists, mainly in England because they didn't have a civil war, but it becomes contagious at some point. And that is what Jesus shows us on the cross, our willingness to accept suffering without a trace of the desire to inflict further suffering or to retaliate, while we insist on the truth with love of our common humanity, if you're with me here. And that willingness to suffer in the cause with love and truth is contagious. And you see that with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement. So he gets thousands of kids to march in Birmingham, and the white racists come out with fire hoses and police dogs, and the kids are willing to suffer, and it melts all our hearts, and segregation falls. Now, when we get rid of nuclear weapons and end wars, it's going to be because all of us are going to rise up and start to follow Jesus and be nonviolent and be willing to suffer in the struggle for justice and peace. So nonviolence, organized grassroots, bottom-up movements of nonviolence are a threat to the power structures. And power is everything. And the people in power, the military companies, the oil companies, the dictators, they don't give up their power. But we have more power than them. We have the power that God gave us. Jesus says in Luke 10, I'm giving you power. It's the power of nonviolence. Dr. King defined nonviolence as power. Isn't that amazing? He's saying, friends, we have the power to end segregation. We just need a couple hundred of us. And he was right. But we're all too afraid and we don't believe it. But the government understands that. So that's why movements are really people power. And if they're meticulously nonviolent, and if we can do that with Black Lives Matter and No Kings, and we need a whole new anti-war movement, environmental movement, where people stop business as usual and really give their lives like Jesus did and calls us to, we can stop all this insanity and violence and killing and transform our governments. I mean, I never thought the Vietnam War was going to end as a kid. I never thought apartheid would end or Mandela would become president. Or do you remember there was a thing called the USSR? And it's now gone, and communism is gone, and the Berlin Wall fell. Those were all through peaceful bottom-up movements. So we can totally get rid of nuclear weapons. This is not magic, though. Jesus says the way forward is follow me. He's basically a movement organizer, and he marches the poor from Galilee to Jerusalem, where he does civil disobedience, and we need to continue that today. And that movement in the early church brought down the Roman Empire, and we need to do that to end all the empires and wars today. Hey, you better interrupt me, or I'll keep preaching and going on and on.
Hey, I love it. It's fantastic.
I'm not going to let you get a word in edgewise.
What we need to do if we want to get rid of nuclear weapons, if we want to say enough is enough, we want this movement. Can you give me an example from the civil rights movement, from Martin Luther King Jr. and what they were doing? How did nonviolence not just stay a tactic of what they were doing, but what was the surrender to the will of God in the midst of what they were doing? What did that look like? And what would that look like for a movement to stop nuclear weapons?
Well, thank you. Wow, what a question. Gandhi and Dr. King and their people were a million miles ahead of us. And so were Jesus and the early church. We have drifted far, far back. So I just did a podcast. I have a podcast too, Joshua, called the Nonviolent Jesus Podcast. And I had Andrew Young on recently. But I got to know all of Dr. King's friends and Coretta. And Jim Lawson was one of my best friends. He was the main strategist of the whole civil rights movement, whom Dr. King said was the greatest teacher of nonviolence in the world. And I actually talked with him a month before he died about this book and surrender. Well, anyway, Andrew Young said to me just a month or two ago, you have no idea what the civil rights movement was like. It is not anything like the books say or anything like you think, because we didn't know what we were doing. That's what he said to me. So we were praying all the time, and we were singing all day long. And he says, I still sing all day long. Now, that's the holiness of the African American community through their centuries of suffering as an enslaved people, the gospel music. So he's telling me that they were every day, King and their friends would go, okay, Jesus, what do we do? They're going to kill us. Help us to be nonviolent. And that's how they lived, hour by hour. And so they were rooted in a faith and surrender and love and building community through the spirituals. And so they did a lot of training every day, and they did a lot of hard strategizing. None of that's happening now. So, for example, Black Lives Matter is the largest movement in U.S. history. We now know 26 to 28 million people participated in basically no violence. But there was very little strategy going on. You know, that's not the way the civil rights movement was. Same with Gandhi. He started out real small and the Salt March. Gandhi spent 2 years meditating, what do I do to bring down the British Empire? And everybody was waiting for him. And do you know the story? And he announces to them, because, okay, this morning God told me what to do. Oh, okay. We're going to walk 250 miles to the beach and pick up salt. And they thought he was nuts. I mean, and the British thought this was nuts. And so Gandhi, they trained for 8 months. He had 79 people. They thought they were going to be shot and killed the first week or jailed. The British thought they're so ridiculous, they ignored them. This is 1930, no telephones, no fax, no computer, no TV. And it was instantly electrifying, and the whole country got the idea. Turns out maybe God was right, because the very poor in India, their whole economy was based on salt, and the British owned the salt, and Gandhi's breaking the law saying, okay, let's all people of India very peacefully and prayerfully take back the salt. And when he did that, the British Empire was over, you know? So right now, for the last 10 years, we've been working, there's a new global movement which won the Nobel Peace Prize called the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. They won the Nobel Peace Prize about 10 years ago, and I've been very involved with them. They started, which I thought was crazy because I was one of the speakers at the launch of it. They say, we're going to get rid of nuclear weapons. And I'm going, this was in Oslo, Norway. Martin Sheen and I were the keynote speakers. And we go, oh, that's good to know. God, I was like, well, I mean, I don't really think we could. Well, anyway, they know we're going to do this. These are the people who got rid of landmines. And they got Princess Diana to come in, and they systematically went around the world and outlawed landmines through the United Nations to the point that they shamed the big nations that built them. And now landmines are gone. They're being banned. Then, after the 90s, they said, let's take on cluster bombs. And they did the same thing through the UN. So in 2012, they said, we're going to do this with the United Nations to get rid of nuclear weapons. We're going to slowly get every nation to together sign a law banning nuclear weapons. This has never been done before. It's so obvious. Well, now, 2026, they have over 100 nations have signed the ban treaty at the United Nations outlawing nuclear weapons. Did you know that, Joshua?
That's a lot. No.
Did you know that? No. And
No.
it's the most hopeful thing happening on the planet, while Trump is increasing another $1 trillion for nuclear weapons. Their strategy was to slowly chip away till you get 150 nations, and then you have the 7 nuclear powers left, and they will be shamed into joining the treaty. They did that with landmines. They did that with cluster bombs, and they're on track exactly like they said they would. Now, how is that going to happen? They are doing the global political organizing. We need to do the bottom-up grassroots people power organizing, and the churches should be leading the way. No Christian should have anything to do with building or maintaining nuclear weapons, much less sending your kids off to wage war or bombing people or building, or running military bases. Those days have got to be over if we're going to follow this guy, the nonviolent Jesus. But what you're asking me, the churches didn't even talk about nuclear weapons or climate change or or the Iran war or the genocide in Gaza. So the church has to be completely changed, completely disarmed, and we have to go really deep, like Dr. King and his people did, into total surrender. We're giving our lives for a new world of racial equality. And that's how the tipping point can begin. So we know that what's missing is not just the political will, but we've got organizing around the world, not here in the US, but also a spiritual will. We all still want to control God and be in charge of God. And if you follow the book of Isaiah in chapter 2, and I'll end with this, is, all the nations of the world climb the mountain of God, Joshua. What happens? It says they all sit down and shut up, and God instructs them. And what's the third movement? Once you meet God, you immediately go down the mountain, beat your swords into plowshares, and you never study for war again. That's the will of God. Jesus goes way beyond that and says, well, we love even our enemies. We love the people of that we're bombing in Iran, let's say. So we love everybody on the planet because we are the sons and daughters of God. This is who we are. Blessed are the peacemakers. We make peace because we're just sons and daughters of the God of peace. Is there a problem here? Did I misread that, Joshua?
You didn't misread that, but I think the church has misread a lot.
I don't
for
think
some
they've
reason.
read that. I don't think they
Or
read
they
We just threw it
maybe
out.
they've skipped over it and threw it out.
No, we rejected it and turned to Cicero in 315 and came up with a just war theory. And now it's all Christians having
arguing
holy wars
over which war is holy. Exactly. And so what's it going to take for us to start to follow the nonviolent Jesus? Like, not just the nice Jesus that we see in our Sunday school classes, but the nonviolent Jesus that's actually there in scripture that you saw line by line, that it was there in the Gospels.
Well, I don't know. I was writing in my books and I've been teaching that, to me, it's clear that Jesus is totally nonviolent. And what more could he have done to invite us peace, universal love, universal compassion, universal peace? He's in the Garden of Gethsemane. Here come the horrible soldiers. What is Peter going to do? Peter's thinking, oh my God, they're going to get our guy. I got to do something. If violence is ever justified, if there's ever a just war theory, this is the moment. And he's right. And just as he goes to kill to protect our guy, Jesus says, put down the sword. I think that's the first time they realized how deadly serious Jesus is about nonviolence. So they all run away from him. They all run away from him. He goes to his death as nonviolent as ever, and then he comes back and he's still gentle and nonviolent, says, now you go forward and do this. So I think we have to keep retelling the story of Jesus as a story of total nonviolence and movement organizing, and then help us to reimagine God as total nonviolence and universal love. God is the image, the possibility that God could support war is not just blasphemy or heresy. It's just a false image, a false God. It's not true. That's the whole testimony of Jesus. And therefore, if we can reimagine who God is, maybe we can reimagine what it means to be human. To be human is to be nonviolent. To be church. Well, the church should be the community of nonviolent followers of the nonviolent Jesus. I don't see the problem there. I've said this in the Vatican in this speech. Like, what did I miss something? It's the church community of people who want to give their lives like Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Romero and Dorothy Day. And therefore, we take to the streets. Now, Martin Luther King and Selma gave a really great definition of the church. Joshua, I don't know if you ever heard it. It's shocking. And he's so brilliant because Martin, he said things so profound in a really ordinary way. So he goes, here's my definition of the church. It just kills me. The church is the place you go from. Well, that turns everything around. So we're leaving from the church and we're marching from Selma to Montgomery, where we're going to demand justice. And the church is really a church that's out on the streets and marching for justice, disarmament, end all wars, abolish nuclear weapons, as well as racism and executions and gun violence. And let's fund, jobs, healthcare, schools, food, housing, clean water for every human being on the planet. All this is doable, but the church is the community that should be doing it. It's not doing it. I don't know what else to do except to do it, not only to teach it and talk about it and lift up this call, but to try to practice it in our own lives, which is why I keep going back to jail and keep getting in trouble. And I'm having a good time doing it, let me just say. And the more I surrender to God and get my stupid ego out of the way, and we're going to do things my way. I'm in control of the peace movement. We're going to, the more I let go, the more happens, and the happier and more peaceful I am. The more I'm in charge, the less happens, the worse things are interiorly and in peace movement, because I'm in charge. But if I can just let go and be peaceful, like all the great peacemakers I've known, God can then run with us and do things. And that gets me excited. And that's why I talk like this every day for the last 45 years. I'm still on fire with the possibilities, but I can't tell anybody what to do except, like you, I would say, go to Jesus, ask him, read the Sermon on the Mount. Stop. I would not read the rest of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, or St. Paul, or anybody. Just read the next the four Gospels and the Sermon on the Mount every day for the next 30 years and get back to me. Now, Gandhi read from the Sermon on the Mount every morning and every evening for the last 45 years of his life. Did you know that, Joshua?
Wow.
Isn't that incredible? And
That's
he's not
amazing.
a Christian, but he's saying these are the only teachings that matter. And unlike the rest of us, he didn't just say, wow, that's really mysterious and beautiful writings, that he added. He said, no, I'm not taking this as poetry or really nice writing. I'm going to do what the guy said. I'm going to change my life. This is an instruction manual of what to do today. Okay, well, how am I going to be a peacemaker today? That means, how am I going to help stop this war in Iran? How am I going to help my country dismantle its nuclear arsenal? That's what Jesus is looking for, people who will help him with that project. You better interrupt me because I'm on a roll.
You are on a roll. I love it when you're on a roll. It gets me fired up. So I'm okay with it. It's getting me fired up. But I would love to know this book, Universal Love, Surrendering to the God of Peace. As you give up control of this book and you surrender to God, what hopes are there for this book? Like, what do you hope this book could give to people? What do we want to actually learn from this and embody and live out?
What do you mean by hope? It's really crazy to write a book on surrendering to God, because then you have to surrender the book and you have to practice what you preach. That's why I say throughout the book, hey, I don't really do this. I'm just trying to figure out how to do this, and I know I should. If you read, the kid kept telling me, and I put it like on the first page of the book, you tell everybody you don't practice this very well, John. So that's totally fine. But, it's interesting. This book is totally bombed. And the book industry is very hard now anyway. Who would want to buy a book on surrendering to God? And not only that, the mystics all told us to surrender to God and abandon ourselves to divine providence. I'm saying it has political implications. I don't know anyone else who's said that before. I think I'm talking about the politics of surrendering, of doing the will of God. And then you end up like Gandhi and Dr. King, pretty much in today's world. You have to be standing up publicly and saying no to this insanity. So I kind of long ago let go of all these things. My teacher, Daniel Berrigan, he used to quote his friend Thomas Merton and Dorothy Day. that you do the good because it's good. You do what's right because it's right. You speak the truth because it's truthful, and then you leave the outcome in God's hands. It's not you're not in charge anymore. I'm trying to practice that more and more. So that means I really don't even have any expectations for anything. My life, my books, this book, the podcast. To me, in such a moment where everyone is so brainwashed and so stuck in the American culture, which is destroying us, eating us alive, eating us out, our soul. We're losing our souls and we don't even know it. To me, it's just a matter of sowing seeds, I suppose, and being as loving as I can, and trying to get out of God's way. One of the casualties of this insane moment we're living through, the culture of war, is the loss of the imagination. Jesus called it blindness. We're totally blind now. And he came to help us see. He's the only one who could see God and see God in every human being. What the abolitionists did really is marked a way for all of us to go forward. And this is in terms of the spiritual life and surrender and its political implications, which is Jesus is calling us to help one another reclaim the imagination for peace. That is to say, the abolitionists stood up and saying, we are announcing a new world without slavery. A world of racial equality is coming. Everybody said, you're crazy. They gave their lives to that vision, and they lifted up, reclaimed the imagination of what it means to be human, or what the world could be. Jesus did that on everything. And our job is so much harder. We have to follow Jesus and help announcing and helping each other see the possibility of the reign of God at hand. A new world is coming, a world without war, hunger, nuclear weapons, fossil fuels, the destruction of the environment, racism, executions. And I said this to millions of people, and everybody goes, well, you're nuts. And I go, no, that's the reign of God coming, God's reign of universal love. So we want to help each other see and reclaim the imagination. We got to keep teaching each other the nonviolence of Jesus, and helping liberate each other out of this culture, this addiction to war and Trump and insanity. But, just the United States or any country, and to become universal people of universal love, universal compassion, universal peace, so that we're one with the sisters and brothers in Gaza, Congo, Sudan, Yemen, Iran, Venezuela, all the places where people are being bombed and killed. We're fully alive Christians living in the kingdom of God, and so we're going out to try to stop the suffering and killing of our sisters and brothers around the planet. I don't know how to do that. I just keep saying that's what we're called. And I've learned something new on my journey, which is from Archbishop Tutu, that if you want to go all the way, John, you have to completely surrender and do only God's will, and no more of your selfish will, and wait around and do what you want and what you think best. Those days are over. And it's got to be 100% the will of God. In other words, that my life is now over. I give my life to Jesus. You use me for peace and justice work, however you want. And actually, it's very exciting. And it's much more, the gospel comes alive much more. And oddly enough, I'm finding I'm happier. And Tutu talked about that. You get way beyond anger or hatred or ego or telling people what to do or even despair. And Andrew Young said this to me too. You move into grief over the world and joy. Joy. You have a deep, now I'm not talking about happiness, a deep down inner joy in God that no one can take away. I think Martin King had it when they killed him, and Romero and Gandhi. There's an inner joy there that they were being persecuted. And I know that from my experience in jail. So that's kind of where I'm at right now today, Joshua. And it's not a 5-year plan. It's just a call to discipleship, I guess, and live the gospel. And I'm telling folks, nothing else is work. We're going to die anyway. So let's just put all our chips on Jesus and do what the poor guy wanted and get with the project of total nonviolence and go get arrested and cause trouble, rock the boat, and let's end all these wars and racism and injustice and start being serious disciples. Why not?
Amen. Amen. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's do it. This book, Universal Love, is out now anywhere books are sold. And I want people to get the book and then sow seeds of peace all over the place, and not just get the book, hand it out and buy many copies so you can hand it out, but actually then start to live what it says, that as you surrender to the God of peace, surrender to universal love, that we could be channels of universal love and
Yeah.
nonviolence and peace in the world, because we have said, not my will, but your will be done in my life. What do you want from me today? And we can start to live that. That is where we need to get to. And I think more important than reading it, because this will inspire you to be able to do it and give you some good tools and tips to be able to surrender. But just go. And as you told Will to go and meditate for 30 minutes and sit with universal love and surrender. And then he's like, hey, I think I need to be a channel of universal love in the world and extend universal love to the world. We could all be like that and do that today.
Amen.
John, this was fantastic. How can people connect with what you're doing, the Beatitudes project, your podcast, the Nonviolent Jesus? Where can people connect with what you're doing?
Oh, that's great. Thank you. So at our website, beatitudescenter.org. And there you can find all kinds of Zooms that I do with peacemakers from around the country and the world. And you can find out about the weekly free global podcast, the Nonviolent Jesus Podcast. I've had all kinds of people on, from Martin Sheen and Joan Baez to Cornel West to Andrew Young, as I said, and Brian Stevenson. It's just been very exciting. And I give talks as well. That's everywhere on Apple and Spotify and YouTube and Substack. It's the front page of the National Catholic Reporter every week. But you can easily find it all at beatitudescenter.org. You can also look at my personal website, johndeere.org, which has all my 40 books on Jesus and peace and nonviolence. But they're all still in print. You can get them at Amazon. And if people can help support me, I would appreciate it. And by that, I mean getting the books and promoting the message through the podcast and the Zooms. That would be great. And mainly, as Joshua said, let's all, go forward and follow the nonviolent Jesus. And I mean, really rise to the occasion, because things are bad. Giving in, giving up, living in despair is not the way of Jesus. We want to rise to the occasion and be stronger. And that's why I was writing about going deeper into inner surrender and stronger into public, organized, nonviolent movements. It's great stuff, man.
Amen.
Amen.
It is. It's amazing. It's good stuff. So, John, thank you for this conversation. Really, really, it was an honor to talk to you. And I really, if we could help just a few people continue on this journey of following the nonviolent Jesus, I think this conversation is worth it. So, thank you. It was fantastic. I loved it.
Thanks for having me on. All the best to you, Joshua. Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out. Share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.